Hello, everyone out in internet land, and welcome back, and Happy New Year for that matter. We're so excited to have all of you join us today for this really special webinar, which is going to kick off a new webinar series for us. We have John Kelly with us today, a very special guest, awesome presenter, extremely knowledgeable, but above and beyond all of that, just an extremely cool person. So we'll be hearing from John today, presenting on school-based mental health services within a multi-tiered system of supports framework. Anyway, John, could you take us to the next slide and we'll walk the audience through the agenda? I'm just going to do a brief introduction here. Obviously, I don't want to eat into John's presentation. He's got a lot of really great content. And so he'll present for somewhere around 40 to 45 minutes. And then from there, we'll do a Q&A. And so I want to remind all of you that are familiar with Zoom, we have a chat functionality. So as you have questions, please put them in the chat. We won't answer them in real time, but when we get to the Q&A portion of the presentation, we'll address those questions in order. And so make sure as you have questions to put them down. At any rate, we are Illuma Online Therapy, and we are a provider of related services and mental health support online to K-12 and K-12 districts and schools all over the country. Right now, we're in 36 states. We have 300 dedicated members, and we are continually growing. Obviously, the need for related services and mental health supports is great and growing. So with that, we would ask all of you to follow us on Twitter. We've got lots of great information that we're always putting out there. And obviously you can receive updates for webinars and all kinds of informative stuff. So yeah, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook. You can see the address there. We invite you to do so. Just a few facts about this webinar. This is the initial webinar and is part of an ongoing series, Creating Better Mental Health and Wellness in Our Schools. John's helped us put together an all-star lineup of really great school psychologists who can help us learn a ton about everything that you need to know with regards to creating mental health and wellness. Upon the conclusion of this webinar, we will provide a slide deck, certificate of attendance, and a recording to the link, so that if you want to go back and watch it again, if you want to reference some of the materials, you can do so at your leisure. I would expect that would probably be sent out Friday or Monday, so give us about 48 hours and we'll get these materials sent to you. Everyone who registered will get a link. And then on with the presenter. Again, as I mentioned, John Kelly is a bit of a rock star in the world of school psychology, but he's a true gentleman and a scholar. Obviously, he comes highly qualified to us. He's got his PhD at St. John's University or rather at Hofstra. He studied at St. John's, and he's a practicing school psychologist at Comac School District in New York. Obviously, he's published all sorts of stuff, and maybe you can reference a bit of that stuff in your presentation, John, making reference to all of the different contributions you've made. You can all see there what he's done. But above and beyond that, John is a leader in the world of school psychology. Obviously, he's an executive board member at the New York Association of School Psychologists and is also a past president of the National Association of School Psychologists. Above and beyond that, John has received numerous awards and has been very distinguished in his career, including the New York State School Practitioner of the Year and also the National Association of School Psychologists, School Psychologist of the Year. So without any further ado, let's turn it over to John and let him get into his presentation.
All right. Well, good afternoon, George. Thank you so much for that introduction. It truly is a pleasure to be here and be with numerous colleagues from across the country. This is an exciting series. I think, as George pointed out, we're excited to kind of kick the series off tonight and follow with the next 4 Wednesdays with some friends and colleagues of mine who I'm sure that many of you will recognize, but more than recognize, I think value what they're going to bring to the table. Eric Rossen will be here next week talking about compassionate, trauma-informed practices. Peter Faustino will be here the following week talking about autism and the intersection with mental health issues. Ben Fernandez, a rock star within the area of crisis response in the schools, really just talking about some best practices. And a true rock star, Todd Savage, good friend within the LGBTQ community, talking a little bit about how we can make our schools safe for LGBTQ students. So definitely looking forward to kicking off the series tonight, talking just a little bit about the provision of school-based mental health services within a multi-tiered system of support type of framework. Now, I'm going to assume that many of us are very familiar with the framework in and of itself, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that tonight. But for those who know me, I am an Irishman, and I do like to tell stories, not to stereotype, but yes, I do fit that stereotype and love to tell stories. So I'm going to start out tonight with a story that I like to tell, particularly when I'm talking about mental health services in the schools. It's a story about a village at the bottom of a particular river. And one day, one of the villagers is standing out by the riverside and sees a child floating downriver. And he looks up and says, "What is going on here?" Obviously dives into the river, goes out into the current, saves the child, brings the child back in to the riverside, and sends the child back upriver. The next morning, he's out there doing his morning routine, and all of a sudden he sees another child and a second child coming downstream. And he calls one of his fellow villagers and he says, come, help me. We have to save these children. We have to get in the river and pull them out of the current. And they dive in and they pull the children back, and then they send them back upriver. Third day he's down there, the same thing occurs. He finally goes to the villagers and says, we need to form a team. We need to form a team that's going to monitor the river to make sure that we're saving kids as they're floating downstream. We can't let any kids go by or drown on our watch. And the village elder turned to him and said, why don't we go back upstream and find out what's going on? Why are we seeing these kids floating downriver each and every day? We can have the best team out there, but let's figure out what's going on. And so that's what they did. They went back upriver, and sure enough, what they found was a bridge that spanned that river, that went across. And unfortunately, the bridge was old and was missing a number of planks. And some of the children were able to make it across from plank to plank, but there were some that unfortunately fell through the gaps in that bridge into the river and then floated downstream. And that's when the villagers downstream had to jump in and save them. Now, I like to tell that story because I think about all of my years of working in the schools and think about, isn't this what we do, unfortunately, each and every day? We dive in when there's a crisis situation. We jump in so kids don't drown. We form teams to make sure we're monitoring the kids. We monitor data, we monitor behavior. Instead, what I'm going to challenge you to do is let's take that walk back upstream today. Let's take that walk back up into our school systems and maybe find where we're missing some of those planks in that bridge that spans the school years of when the children are with us. Now, let's face it, it has not been easy. As George said, I'm a school psychologist on Long Island in New York. It's my 35th year working in the schools. And I have to tell you, this is a tough, tough school year. The mental health needs and the need for support is just grown exponentially. You know, we used to talk about backpacks and how heavy backpacks were for kids and how we were damaging kids' backs, you know, by the amount of weight that was in those backpacks. But I think about what kids are carrying in their backpacks nowadays. And it's not the books. It's not the pencils and the papers and even the computers that everyone is carrying. No, it's the issues of what they're bringing into those classrooms. Issues that have nothing to do with the curriculum, issues that have nothing to do with the quality of the teacher at the front of that class. But these issues we know as mental health professionals are going to impact kids and their ability to function within those classrooms. And part of our jobs as mental health professionals in the schools is really, how do we develop systems that will address these issues? So quite simply, kids can learn. Now, this is a phrase we've heard all throughout the pandemic, that although we may be in the same storm, the reality is we're not in the same boat. Kids, adults, staff members, families, communities are experiencing this pandemic in very, very different ways. And so it's really tough to kind of compare one's experience to another, because they are in a different boat. Some are sailing through this pandemic on a nice luxury liner, a yacht, and others are just barely getting by on that little dinghy. And the variation in resources that school districts have available to them is often one of the major factors in terms of how school districts are actually dealing and supporting kids as they go through this. But what we do know is we have to create environments that are safe, supportive, and stable for not only our students, but for our staff. I don't know about you, but I could tell you my staff that I work with, my colleagues, and I work at the high school level, they're struggling just the same as some of our kids are struggling. And so those safe, supportive, and stable communities, those environments that we're trying to create, are just as important as for the students as they are for us as well. So I don't think I really need to go into a lot of detail in terms of why this work is so important. I feel, hopefully with this audience that I'm preaching to the choir on this, but we know that a lot has happened since March of 2020. I mean, who knew that we'd be here 2 years later? I could tell you, I didn't anticipate this. I think many of us thought, okay, this is serious. It's something we have to address, but it's going to pass, and we're going to move forward in our lives. But it's not just the pandemic that has occurred within the past few years. We've been dealing with societal issues, social justice issues. Obviously, as a result of the pandemic, we've dealt with social isolation, illness, losses. These are significant factors that have impacted our children over the past couple of years. And yet it's not over. It's not as if it's ended. And that's one of the most difficult pieces. And I know Eric Rossman will talk about this next week as he talks about trauma, but one of the critical factors is that because it's been such a prolonged period of time, and each time we feel there's an end in sight, there are new things that seem to crop up. And so that makes it very, very difficult for us to truly try to recover and deal with what we've experienced over these past couple of years. And unfortunately, that connection, I always say, and some of my colleagues who are listening in will hopefully smile at this, but I always say that relationships are the basis of everything that we do in the schools. And those relationships that we build with students, those relationships that we build with teachers, with parents, with administrators, those are the connections that become vital for when we're struggling on that emotional level. And yet, unfortunately, this is one of the major areas where we are impacted. We can't have those connections. We can't be together in ways that we often need to be in order to deal with some of those stressors that are happening around us. So, we're seeing the impact. And again, I know that many of you may be aware of this, but, in the fall, in October, 3 major child and adolescent organizations issued a rather important but rather dire statement. The American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the Children's Hospital Association issued a declaration of a national emergency in children and adolescent mental health. Essentially, what they were telling us is that they're seeing these soaring rates of mental health challenges with children, with adolescents, with families. And it's not just the COVID pandemic that we're dealing with. It was interesting that they acknowledged some of the societal issues, some of the structural racism, the inequities that have come about and are forefront, they're right in front of us, and the impact that all of this has had. And once again, the ongoing nature of this, where they felt it was important to declare that national state of emergency in children's mental health care. And then just last month, I'm not sure if many of you saw this, but the US Surgeon General issued an advisory on youth mental health crisis. And I thought one of the statements that really stood out for me was the one that I have bolded here: the future well-being of our country depends on how we support and invest in the next generation. That's powerful. So combining those two statements, this national emergency and the US Surgeon General recognizing the impact on our children and adolescents and families, and saying we need to make an investment because the future of our country really depends upon that. So I like to, I know many of you are familiar with Bruce Perry, Dr. Bruce Perry, and I love Dr. Perry's work as related to trauma. And I think for me, it's one of those guiding frameworks that's easy to apply in the schools, because he talks often about the need to help children when they've experienced some type of traumatic event, that ability to regulate their emotions. Because what trauma does to us, and again, I know Eric will get into this, and what we've all experienced on a very personal level, is that emotional dysregulation, the impact, the anxiety, the depression, just that sense of not being able to problem solve. And it all comes from that sense of emotional dysregulation. Disruption that we've experienced has resulted in that emotional dysregulation. So the first thing that we need to do in the schools is, how do we help kids to regulate their emotions? That's one of the first steps in terms of addressing mental health issues. Once we can help kids to regulate their emotions, then we can help them to relate. We're hearing a lot of conversation right now in the media. We hear it, within our own school systems about how kids are having difficulty relating. There's fights and arguments, kids having difficulty socializing. I'm going to propose to you that we haven't dug down deep enough to help kids emotionally regulate yet. We're focused, we're jumping ahead too quickly. Say, well, let's help them with their social relationships, and let's get them back, and that will cure everything. No, what we need to do is we need to take the step to help kids develop that emotional regulation. Then we can help them to relate. And then finally, we can get them to that point where they can benefit to what we're trying to give to them within that classroom. They can engage in the learning process. They can reason their way through. So that emotional regulation becomes a critical starting point for many of us. Now, this is an important point for me, that when we talk about mental and behavioral health in the schools, we often go to that kind of mental illness, the problem side, the challenges that our students seem to engage in. And yet, here's my challenge for you. When we talk about mental health, recognize mental health is really a spectrum from mental wellness to mental illness. And that spectrum is something that we're trying to promote and support students. So we're promoting the mental wellness. And so as we talk about developing programs within the schools, our key goal is to promote mental wellness. It's all about helping them with that emotional regulation, developing social emotional competencies, and we'll dive into that in just a minute. But yes, obviously we need to develop strategies. We need to help students develop coping mechanisms to deal with those challenges, to deal at times with that mental illness. So again, keep in mind as we go through the presentation this afternoon, that when we talk about mental and behavioral health, we're really talking about that full spectrum from emotional wellness to emotional illness. So what we know, very simply, is that the earlier we can get in and intervene, the quicker and less expensive the task is to help kids catch up. And the longer students go without assistance or some type of intervention, the more timely, the more time it takes for us to truly remediate or help the students. And so I know, again, I'm preaching to the choir about early intervention, but it's important for us to take a look at those early intervention services, those universal services that we'll talk about, which really help kids develop some of the skills. So again, this is your kind of obligatory slide on multi-tiered systems of support. Just for those who may not be as familiar with MTSS, it is truly a framework. It's a system that we look at. It's not an intervention unto itself. It really allows us to plug in different interventions, different strategies within the framework. So those tier 1 interventions are all about the promotion of mental and behavioral wellness. It's about developing all of these skills that everyone really needs. It's about setting up systems school-wide as opposed to with individual students or targeted students. And so that tier 1 becomes very, very important. Tier 2 is more targeted, again, for students who are beginning to show some signs, certain behaviors are beginning to emerge, and we want to get in early. We want to make sure that we're addressing issues so that they don't grow to bigger and more impactful types of issues in the student's life. And so that tier 2 is really that targeted. And the tier 3 is, yes, those intensive services, oftentimes the individual services. These are for students who are displaying behaviors, who are having challenges that really require much more intensive services. But what I really want you to think about, and sometimes we don't do this justice, services provided at all 3 levels are considered mental and behavioral health services. So those tier 1 services that we provide, those universal supports, those are mental health services, just the same as those intensive tier 3 individualized supports, more clinical measures, things of that nature. So recognize, because a lot of times I hear in having these conversations that colleagues will say to me in different schools, well, John, my school, we really don't provide those individual services. We don't provide those clinical services. So we really don't do mental health services in the schools. And my challenge back is always, well, do you talk about social emotional learning? Do you teach kids, skills within the classroom, relationship skills? Do you have any group work maybe that you do with students? I'm like, yeah. Well, you're doing mental and behavioral health work within the schools. So be kind to yourselves and recognize that most of you are in fact engaging in this. Now, this is, CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning, has done some amazing research. They're my go-to source, all of our go-to source on social emotional learning. And this is a study, it's a bit dated by now, but I think it's still very, very relevant, where they looked at all different categories of educational, psychological, social variables, and the impact that these variables or these factors had on learning and students' ability to learn. And what they found was that social emotional variables exerted the most powerful influence on academic performance. That is powerful. That's a powerful statement when I'm talking about the need for support services within my schools, when I'm having conversations with administrators. And I have to tell you, I've been blessed in my career to have administrators who really get it. And I think that's why I've been around for so long and been with my district for such a long time. But we often have to have these conversations and have our teacher colleagues, our administrative colleagues, and sometimes our parents understand why these social emotional components are so important. Because again, the research is pretty clear, exerts the most important influence, the most powerful influence on the student's ability to learn. So a few years back, I began to kind of think about how can we reconceptualize or kind of refocus school-based mental health services? Because it's a tough conversation to have sometimes. Sometimes we feel we're competing against those academic demands. And you know, you walk into a teacher's classroom and you want to talk about social emotional supports, and they're talking about their curriculum and what they need to get through, and you know, the state tests that they're preparing for. And so I began to rethink and reconceptualize, what is school-based mental health really all about? And pulling upon that research that I just cited from Castle, it is about the promotion of learning. And so if we can tie our services to the core foundation of what schools are all about, that becomes a critical component. And so we need to support our teacher colleagues in that classroom, because they are on the front lines. They are those primary change agents that are out there. But we become, and I'm not trying to be fancy here, I'm not trying to play word games, but we become educational enhancers. Now, I like that title. I don't know about you, but I like that title, educational enhancer. You can call me a school psychologist. I'm a proud school psychologist. I have very good colleagues who are social workers, school counselors. We're all proud in our work, but to be an educational enhancer, that's a pretty nice title. And what it does is it ties our work to that core function of what school is all about. We promote social emotional development to promote learning. And it no longer becomes a tangential type of topic. It no longer becomes an add-on. It no longer becomes something additional that has to be added into the classroom. No, it becomes a core part of what schools are all about. And so my challenge is, how do you refocus your role and refocus the role of mental health services within your schools? And so we're going to talk about the model. I want to give credit to the National Association of School Psychologists, who really has done a lot of work in this area, and a lot of partners in this work. But this model is a model that was developed a number of years ago. We love our triangles. We love our kind of different tiers. But when we talk about MTSS, we are talking about different tiers, and kind of recognizing at each different level where different services can be plugged in. What should we really be looking at? And so we're going to walk through some of the tiers. At each tier, I try to include different resources for you. As George said at the beginning, you'll be getting a copy of these slides. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about individual interventions. I tried to give you just a little bit of a sense on some of the evidence-based practices that are out there at the different levels. So let's kind of dive into it a little bit more. Now, conceptually, one of the problems that we have is when we look at this type of model, a tiered model, folks sometimes look at it and say, okay, well, I'm in tier 1 now, and I'm going to move to tier 2, and eventually I might be working in tier 3, as if they're separate entities, as if we somehow only have a silo that we work in. And that's a mistake, because I think what we have to recognize when we talk about MTSS, we're really talking about layering of support. And so, a student who maybe is involved in some, group supports, say a social skills group, or an anxiety management group, a mindfulness group, that would be more like a tier 2 type, as we'll see in just a moment. That doesn't mean that they stop participating in what's happening at the tier 1. That doesn't mean that they aren't exposed to the work we're trying to do universally with all of our students. And so conceptually, it's important to recognize when we talk about a multi-tiered system of support, we're really talking about a layering of supports. And you know, some kids are involved in multiple layers as we go through. So early identification, screening, progress monitoring becomes an important part of MTSS. We want to avoid kind of being reactive. We want to avoid that villager who has to dive in to the river because the child is in crisis, is floating downstream, is caught up in the current, and is unfortunately starting to go underwater. No, we don't want that reactive approach. And so early identification screening is often an important part of an MTSS system. Now screening, just a quick word, quick tangent on screening. I realize that screening at times is difficult because many times schools are reluctant to engage in screening. The old adage of, well, if we identify them, we have to service them. If we don't have the services, what are we supposed to do? I get all that. Hopefully today, we're going to have some ideas on what we can do and maybe plug once again some of those gaps. Because to me, it's not a good enough answer to say, well, I don't want to screen because I don't want to identify kids. No, you're going to find those kids because those are the kids that are unfortunately going to float downstream. You're going to have to dive in a crisis type of situation. So recognizing that early intervention screening becomes an important part. Now, you don't have to engage in fancy screening. There are some wonderful screeners that are out there. Colleagues like Steve Kilgus, Katie Eklund, there's lots of people that are doing some great work in terms of mental and behavioral health screening within the schools. But we have a lot of data. If we just look at what we have, many schools are developing data or using data teams to look at behavioral data, to look at attendance data, to look at grades. Just that data alone becomes important. We have a lot of test data on file with kids. You know, we're forever testing kids for state testing, things of that nature. So there's a lot of data that we have on hand that we could use as screeners, not necessarily going down a formal screening pathway. It's all a matter of how do you use the data that you have on hand. Now, the early identification, yes, working with our staff members. Mental health first aid has really blossomed within these past couple of years because we recognize, once again, we're not asking teacher colleagues to be mental health professionals. We're just asking them to recognize what are some of the warning signs. How do you get connected to a mental health professional? Good friend of mine, Peter Faustino here in New York, created a series of videos on making the warm handoff. And we give them a hard time about, these videos and warm handoff, but that's really what we're talking about, is how do we help facilitate the process of when a teacher is recognizing that a student is struggling or there's been a change, where can that teacher access services and access supports? So that becomes an important part. Stigma is still one of the biggest areas that prevents people from seeking out services. I was speaking with a girl just today who was struggling with reaching out for services because she was afraid of what others were going to think about if they found out that she needed help. And it was heartbreaking. And so as we begin to really introduce programs at a more universal level, and we're talking about it more, it's addressing that risk of stigma for students and really lowering that barrier to kids getting services. So let's take a look at those universal services. We've been talking about it. Again, more at that tier 1. And these are, once again, something that all kids should be exposed to, something that all students really need to develop. And so we've heard a lot about trauma-sensitive practices. Again, I don't mean to keep plugging the future webinars that we have coming up, but I know Eric's going to talk a lot about that. But that, to me, is universal support. That's not something that we need to just have for targeted students or, only a few students at the intensive level. The reality is that trauma-sensitive practices are something that should be school-wide. Understanding the impact of what trauma is all about, understanding how it impacts upon students' development, understanding how it impacts upon a student's ability to learn. And so trauma-sensitive practices become one of those planks that you can fill in for your mental and behavioral health services in the schools. Working with our school counselors, I know school counselors, across the country are often involved in providing guidance lessons. It's part of their national model. The ASCA national model is how school counselors can provide guidance lessons within various classrooms. SEL, social emotional learning. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, give you some resources about that. But the 5 core competencies, the 5 core social emotional competencies are 5 competencies that every child needs to develop. Every child needs to develop not only for their own emotional health, but just socially, work behaviors, problem solving. These are just, once again, something that each and every child really needs. Moving on to more effective discipline policies, restorative justice. These are all various ways that we can fill in some of those planks to address the social emotional needs of kids. So what I want to be able to do is take a look at some of the resources, and I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm going to go through this, not rush through it, but relatively quickly, just so we can have some time in just a little bit for maybe some questions. But these are 2 guides that CASEL puts out, and they're wonderful guides. But what I really want to guide you to, and I apologize, I actually meant to put this slide in, but forgot. CASEL recently developed what's called the District Resource Center, or the DRC. And essentially, it will take a school district from soup to nuts, starting from scratch. Let's say you have nothing at all in terms of social emotional learning. They'll guide you through looking at what your school district needs. Because one of the dangers, and this was pointed out to me by a good friend and colleague, Byron McClure. He was recently talking about social emotional learning and social emotional learning programs. And he said very correctly, oftentimes school districts will go to one of these guides, look at and say, oh, that looks good. Okay, let me pull it. Let me purchase it. Let's try and implement it in my district. And then it fails miserably. Because the reality is that it's not a cookie cutter method. You need to determine what are the needs of your school district, and then find a program that will help to match those needs. And that's what the District Resource Center really does. And so, I don't have it here, and maybe someone could put this in the chat. It's drc.casel, CASEL.org. So it's drc.casel.org, the District Resource Center, and I'm going to just leave it at that. Go to there. It's a soup to nuts types of process. But there are some great programs that are out there. These are all evidence-based programs. The Incredible Years is one that's fairly popular for younger children. Many schools will implement this as a universal support for kids. The nice part about the Incredible Years is that you can begin to move more towards that tier 2, which we'll talk about in just a little bit, where you can get some early intervention in place. You begin to address some of the risk factors sometimes that kids begin to display. The PATHS program is another program. I happen to like the PATHS program because there is a preschool version for those colleagues that maybe work at a younger level. And so that's kind of nice. And once again, they have a K through 5 type of program that's out there. The Penn Resiliency Program is one, once again, that can be used at that universal tier 1, but also can begin to be used at the tier 2 level. We're moving up the grade levels now to elementary, middle school types of programs that are out there. And so these are all just different types of programs, different resources that are available to you. Once again, I'm going to leave these here for you in the slide deck. You'll be able to reference a little bit later on. There are some wonderful guides that are out there in terms of mindfulness. Mindfulness practices is something that we're seeing blossoming, much more accepted within the school setting. I could tell you probably about 4 or 5 years ago now, 2 teacher colleagues in my high school would start every class with a mindfulness moment, a mindfulness exercise. And it really has blossomed into a wonderful program. So much so that if a student is late to class and they're in the midst of a mindfulness moment, the student's not allowed to interrupt. They're not allowed to enter the class until that mindfulness moment is completed. And so that's how serious these staff members have taken it. And I know in talking with students about it, and even fellow colleagues, teachers and other mental health professionals, the value of mindfulness becomes an important component. This is a free guide. A school district in Vermont put this out. So, once again, a wonderful guide for, any school district that is looking to develop, mindfulness types of programs. And there's a ton of web-based resources that are out there as well, anywhere from Learning to Breathe, Mission B, mindfulnessinschools.org. So there are lots of good web-based resources that are out there. Okay, so let's kind of move forward and take a look at more targeted types of interventions. We're moving to that tier 2. And these are once again, interventions that are for kids that are beginning to display some issues, display some behaviors that are a bit problematic. They haven't gotten to kind of that severe level, but we want to get in there early. We want to kind of work with them. And so this is where a lot of our group counseling might come in. Check in, check out is a great research-based type of intervention. Co-planning sessions and wellness plans are kind of 2 newer concepts that we may not be as familiar with. Co-planning is giving students agency, having them work with you to develop supports and plans. I'm really big into empowering students. I'm really big into them feeling a sense of agency in their own work. I mean, ultimately, isn't that what we're trying to do? Is to give them this capacity to engage in behaviors, to engage in coping mechanisms, and not have to always have someone else helping them with that. So co-planning sessions become very, very powerful. And wellness plans are broader than just looking at social emotional issues. Oftentimes there are nutritional issues that students are faced with. We're seeing the tremendous impact of food insecurity, of poverty on kids' ability to learn. And once again, the pandemic and the social unrest that we've been facing has just laid to bear what these cracks are that are often, unfortunately, underlying or unseen. And yet we're now seeing it in its full light. And so, the development of wellness plan really looks at the child in a whole fashion. So, there are different types of strategies, CBT, DBT, types of strategies that are out there. Colleagues of mine in my own high school this summer, some of the social workers, one of the school psychologists, went for some training in DBT in the schools, engaging in psychoeducational work, cognitive restructuring. So there's a variety of different types of interventions at that targeted level that we can really look at. Camp Copeland is one for kind of a younger level that we often will look at for students at that, once again, that tier 2. And so they have a nice initial set of sessions that are really geared towards more of that early intervention work, that preventative work. But they do have later sessions that can bridge into the tier 3 type of work that sometimes students will need. The STAIRS A program is a skills-based program. It's a manualized cognitive behavior therapy program. I sometimes hear from colleagues that they don't feel as though they have the training to do this work, or they don't feel qualified to do the work. And I get that. I'm never going to ask anyone to do anything outside of their area of training or expertise. I think we need to kind of acknowledge that. We need to honor that piece. However, going for training, seeking out professional development, similar to what I just mentioned about, my colleagues going for the DBT training in the schools, is something that we can all and should engage in. But sometimes we have these manualized programs, which will take you through. It's often extremely scripted in many ways. And so if we're not as comfortable in our clinical skills or in our training, sometimes looking for a more manualized approach is something that certainly can be effective. And then, of course, we have programs that are out there looking at anxiety management types of programs. This particular one I like because it's kind of branches into that older population. Sometimes we have difficulties finding programs that are developed more for the high school type of population. And so this is a program that certainly may be something that could be looked into and implemented at that high school level. And then this is an interesting program. This is one that does require some training. The Support for Students Exposed to Trauma program. It's an adaptation of the CBITS program, which is really a trauma-based program. It's a cognitive behavioral program. And it's research-based, evidence-based type of program. And once again, for that kind of mid-range, that 10 to 14. And the evidence behind it is very good in terms of reducing post-traumatic and depressive symptoms and really addressing some of the issues. We're seeing this. We're seeing kids who have been traumatized. And so some of our work needs to be trauma related. And I think that becomes an important part. This program does have formal lesson plans that are kind of laid out for you. And I think that's one of the advantages to be able to implement it in the school itself. So let's move forward to finally that third tier, or that intensive level of support. And we often talk about kind of percentages and where percentages. I try and stay away from talking about percentages, but we do need to pay attention to the number of students that we're really kind of servicing at that tier 3 level. Because I often say, if we are top heavy, if we have a lot of students at that top level in that tier 3, we're missing out on something in our tier 1 and our tier 2 services. Because if we're doing a good job at those universal supports, and we're providing those universal interventions for kids, and we're catching kids early on, we're doing some good screening and some data monitoring, and we're trying to do some of that early intervention at that tier 2 level, well, hopefully we're preventing students from really needing to progress to that more intensive level. But the reality is we're always going to have some students who are going to need some type of intensive service that is out there. And so this is, yes, where we get into more of the individual counseling types of services, the longer term types of services, maybe connecting them, if it's available, to community types of services, working with families. I often, as you can see, will put special education consideration at the tier 3. To me, special education services are not a tier 1 or even a tier 2 service. It shouldn't be our go-to for when a child needs some level of support. No, we should be providing supports for kids well before we're even looking at special education. But again, we recognize and honor that some kids are going to need those individualized supports that are out there. And so, yes, it's important for us to have some level of programming, some level of support to be able to provide those services. And if we can't provide it, and again, I realize that we're not in that same boat, going all the way back to the beginning of the presentation, that different districts have different levels of resources. And some districts are very well resourced, and they can provide a variety of programs, and some districts, unfortunately, are not as well resourced. And this is where we reach out to our community partners. This is where we reach out to available services, maybe online services that district or family can access, because the school may not be able to provide it in and of itself. But these are nonetheless an important part of that overall system. And so a couple of resources that I've used and that I've seen used at different levels. I don't get a kickback on any of these books or programs, but I will, for full transparency, one of the authors, Mike Slukowski, is a friend of mine, and Mike and a colleague. This is the second edition of the book, actually, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy in K-12 school settings. It's a wonderful guidebook. I got to be honest with you. You can literally pick this up, a little bit of knowledge, in terms of cognitive behavior therapy. And Mike and his colleague have done a great job at kind of making easy, accessible types of interventions, ideas for you to implement really at that tier 3 level that's there. This is another evidence-based program, creative CBT interventions for kids. Once again, a wonderful guide that's out there. Many of us are familiar with the Coping Cats program at the younger levels. It's the Coping Cat program, or the CAT project is for older kids. This is a wonderful anxiety-based program for kids. Once again. And finally, I just want to mention Oreen Pinto Wagner, wonderful psychologist, actually based here in New York. I met her a number of years ago at a state conference, and was so impressed with the work that Dr. Wagner was doing, and the material that she has put out. I've used it throughout the years in my school-based practice, as well as in my clinical practice, in working with kids with anxiety disorders, particularly obsessive compulsive disorder. Just a wonderful, once again, easily accessible program. At the younger level, up and down the worry hill, when I've worked with younger children, that has been something that is kids just take to it, and the concepts are so easily explained. At the upper level, she has some workbooks for school professionals, printables, things of that nature. So once again, just another resource that is available to you. So trying to bring in a close for tonight, we're talking about this model, multi-tiered system of support, recognizing they're not separate siloed tiers, but they're really a system of support, a layering of support that is out there. And let's look for those planks that we need to fill, so that we're not jumping in to the river each time a child is in crisis. So let's pause. I'm going to turn it back over to George. I know you've been looking at the chat box. Any questions maybe that I can begin to address?
Yes, we do have some questions. We've got a reminder to all of you, if you haven't asked your questions here, please put them in the chat. I think we have a time for a handful of questions, but the first question that we have here is from Amber. I have heard different things about entry criteria or access points for tier 2 in regards to office referrals. Are there recommendations for good access points when looking for a tiered support within behavior data, screening, etc.?
Yeah, it's a great question, Amber, and you're right. There's different opinions, in terms of how many office referrals does a student get before we kind of begin to move into that tier 2 type of services. When do we really intervene? There are different guides and different opinions that are out there. What I'm going to say to you, quite honestly, is, and this is something that I've tried to implement, is when we look at patterns of behavior. I have a particular student who I work with at my high school, who very quickly this year began to display a pattern of behavior that they weren't major events, they weren't violence or anything of that nature, but it was a pattern of these small behaviors that we began to notice, where I said we have to intervene now. We can't wait for it to build. And so while I'd love to give you a hard and fast number of, 3 office referrals, 4 office referrals, or, 10 absences, which I know many schools do, what I'm going to say to you is look for the pattern of behavior and recognize the earlier we intervene, the better the outcome is for the student.
So within the audience here, John, we have an array of school administrators, we have clinicians, we certainly have school psychologists. I'm going to throw a question at you as a parent. I have a child who is receiving a lot of the services that Illuma provides and also that you provide. And I wanted to get your take on what role, we've talked a lot about pandemic, we've talked a lot about bullying, we've talked a lot about external and social environment effects, but what role are video games, smartphones, social media, and just digital media consumption in general, what is that playing on the struggle with students' mental health? And what are we doing outside of all of this other stuff to address that?
Yeah, I'm smiling a little bit, George, and I'm not smiling because of the issue, because it's a very serious issue, but I'm smiling because it's one of those issues that has kind of evolved. So let me kind of answer that by taking us back a number of years where all we heard about were the dangers of video games and really monitoring our kids' access to online content, and screen time was the big headlines that we saw across the board, and that was very, very important. But it was interesting when you looked at the research in terms of the video game playing or kids' screen time. What we really found was that it didn't necessarily lead to more mental and behavioral health issues. What we found is that there certainly is a subset of kids who may be triggered by certain content that they were exposed to. Certainly kids who spent too much time became almost addicted to their screen time. And while internet addiction or video addiction is not formally recognized as a mental health disorder, it's one of those areas where clearly we're seeing some significant issues with some students. But then the pandemic happened, and we had to turn to technology. We had to turn to screen time, and it really became, in many ways, the only form of connection that we had with others. Zoom parties became a big thing for all of us. I can't tell you how many I got tired of attending Zoom happy hours. But all joking put aside, for students, it became a connection for them. Obviously, an educational connection for continuity of education. It became a social connection for them. And what we have really found is that time, online, is monitored in an appropriate way, is actually something that can be positive for us. It allows us to maintain those social connections. And again, quite honestly, and I think some data is beginning to emerge on this, but anecdotally, I can tell you that for some students, for example, that have anxiety issues or had difficulty attending school, the virtual world, the virtual connections became a savior for them. They really were able to access so much more because of those connections. So it's a double-edged sword. I don't want to condemn screen time and video online activities, but we do need to monitor it and make sure kids are using it appropriately.
Okay, so let's look at the, looks like there's as a school psychologist, this is from TB. As a school psychologist for 24 years, one of the biggest mental health issues I'm observing is the lack of appropriate adult behavior and adult behaviors in front of kids. I agree that we need more mental health supports for students, but first we need more mental health supports for everyone in our communities. True enough, this pandemic has not only affected the kids and students, it's definitely affected all of us as adults, and that's obviously had a cascading effect.
Yeah, just I other than just simply agreeing with TB, I mean, obviously his or her statement, you know, is accurate and correct. You know, I think that it's an important acknowledgement that once again we recognize we've all been through something, and we've all been impacted by what's been happening over these past couple of years. And unfortunately, you know, we're all human. And some of us are you know, reacting based upon what we've been experiencing.
Okay, and it looks like we have two more questions, one of them which I can answer real quick. DM asked, does Illuma partner with school districts as a telehealth provider for mental health needs? Yes, DJ John or D John McNair, yes, we do. Our website is illuma.com. If you go there, you can find the contact information, and we'd be happy to provide more information for you along those lines. John, if you have time for one final question, it's from David Saucedo. How would you explain the difficulty students are having regarding showing their face during virtual learning environments? Several students do not want to show their faces during these lessons. Is it self-esteem, trust, question mark?
Yeah, it's a great question, David, and we are definitely seeing that, you know, for kids that are still involved, you know, in some type of remote type of learning situation. I'm going to say to you that there's generally a couple of different factors that we look at, and it's something that we need to be really sensitive to, quite honestly. Some kids are sensitive to their environment, to what's being shown on the camera. We don't all have you know beautiful backgrounds or something that we're all proud of to have on full display. And so I think some kids are reluctant to simply turn their camera on because of that. But you know, I think your question also goes to, and I think you kind of mentioned it, of you know, how people are concerned, quite honestly, about how they appear and their appearance on Zoom. You know, prior to the start of this webinar, you know, George and I were looking at our lighting and kind of, you know, joking about, well, no one's really coming to see us. And so that's okay. But all joking put aside, I think that there is a level of sensitivity that that we have, or that we need to have, in that some students are uncomfortable, you know, being on camera. I have seen teachers, and I give you know, my teacher colleagues the utmost credit, work out systems with students who are uncomfortable. Sometimes, you know, if a student isn't comfortable having their face on, just having a portion of their body, or just, you know, being able to see a portion of them, so that this teacher knows that they're there. They're not, you know, off playing video games, you know, in their bedroom or anything of that nature. But you know, I always advise, work it through, have a conversation with the student, find out what it is. And guys, let's just be sensitive. Let's be sensitive to what our kids really need at this point in time. I think that that's part of what we just need to embrace. We've all been through really, really difficult times. Let's embrace that sense of being sensitive, being empathic, trying to understand what our kids have been through.